Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Holy Happy Hour. I'm your host, Josh. And before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. We are shooting for 3,000 subscribers. And the coolest part about 3,000 subscribers is that's when the Hallow app will actually look over your channel to see if they are willing to sponsor you. So I think that's the coolest thing. So someone emailed me about that, and I was like, oh, we got to get there. So subscribe. We want to continue to spread Jesus' name. That's the most important part. But we are going to be continuing our series on the seven vices and their opposing virtue. We started last week with pride and humility. And honestly, I just scheduled that first one because that person was available first. And it was awesome because it ended up being the root of all vice and the root of all virtue. And so I was like, that's just an example of I 100% am not in charge of this. The Holy Spirit's guiding everything through this. So this is God's channel. I'm just a tool for it. And so it worked out perfectly. So it was great to talk with Father Castle, the Vicar General. He had some great just recommendations for if you kind of listen and you're hearing this and you're struggling with pride. Here's some practical steps you can kind of follow. So we're going to jump in today, but first we're welcoming back Tara Lauderdale, and you guys know her. But Tara, for anyone
Hey,
that's
what's up,
watching
everybody?
that doesn't know you, kind of give us a brief rundown of who you are, where you're from.
Sure. So I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I currently reside in Long Island, New York. I moved here just like 4 months ago to evangelize. I work for Focus. Formerly, I was a parish missionary and a collegiate missionary, but now I work for their formation department, which just means that I get to prepare content, training, help coach speakers, all that good stuff. So that's what I do now. And I love
Nice.
making Catholic content,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah, that's awesome. So what kind of stuff are you working on currently, or
So
stuff you can tell us about?
yes, so I've
Hmm.
started on a really massive project called A Year of Apologetics through my
Ooh,
podcast Revival.
yeah.
I've never gone deeply into apologetics
Hmm.
before, I think because I've always been a little intimidated by it.
Hmm.
But I decided to devote an entire year to teaching my listeners how
Yeah.
to talk about hard questions. Does God exist? Why does he permit evil? All the way down to, is the Catholic Church the true church established by Jesus Christ? So I
Nice.
just launched those episodes just a couple days ago.
Yeah, season 7, right?
Season
That's
7, which don't be fooled, I have not been doing it for 7 years.
okay. That's okay. I'm actually always super confused when I see a show and Law and Order SVU is on season 180. It seems like, but it's like they haven't been around since the 1800s. So it's like, yeah.
Right.
Uh, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll include the link below so everyone can check
Cool.
that out. And it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, right? Like that one's a
Yep.
listen only.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Well, we are now Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For you
Woo!
non-YouTubers that are listening to this online, you don't get to see my weird mannerisms, but you can still listen to all the great content. So we're going to be uploading this kind. We're going to be uploading everything kind of weird because I've been doing this now. We just passed our 1 year of uploading videos, but interviews were at like 8 months or 9 months. So we're coming up on a
Mm-hmm.
year, but I'm gonna be posting them kind of in a weird order. So
Mm-hmm.
but yeah. Well, great. Well, it's glad to have you back on.
Thanks.
Like I was telling most people or telling you before, we have a live chat going on over here. So these people are going to be putting questions and I'll ignore the weird ones and we'll maybe look through some of them. Um, but we're going to check it out. Right now we've got like we've had like 20, 25 people kind of in and out of it, which has been awesome. And
That's
some people that
awesome.
have been asking some really great questions. I'm like seeing a couple right now, which I'm excited to kind of get to. But yeah, so we're going to jump into our second vice and opposing virtue. So this one is one that for me, I thought I kind of understood, but then I was like, okay, maybe this is deep, a lot deeper than I thought. But it's
Hmm.
is sloth. So I don't know if you want to kind of give us a rundown of kind of what sloth even is, like to start.
Yeah, yes, I'd be
Mhm.
happy to. So I did do a little bit of research beforehand because I wanted to make sure that I knew how to articulate this particular deadly sin well.
Yeah,
Um, and I think sloth is often confused with laziness,
yeah.
but actually sloth is the sorrow of spiritual good, or a sorrow
Mhm.
for spiritual good, or a sorrow for at the thought of pursuing God. It's like a depression um, when faced with the reality that we are made for relationship with God, and it's the lack of pursuit of God.
Okay. So would that be so like when we're talking about like a depression of it, would this be like realizing what you need to do, but like it not exciting you? Like I guess the opposing would be like you're excited, like we're made for this, like oh like
Hmm.
is that kind of what you're saying?
I would say so.
Hmm.
So I read, so Peter Kraft has this great book called Back to Virtue, and he talks about like the opposition of sloth, and he says that the best way to kind of understand the opposite of sloth is through the Beatitudes, and
Mm,
particularly,
yeah.
blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So a sloth is um like knowing that we have that hunger for the infinite,
Hmm.
but yeah, not being willing to make those pursuits and settling for the finite. And then that settling like is like an oppression. It
Hmm.
depresses us and it makes it difficult for us to actually be zealous and take action in pursuing God.
Gotcha. So I wonder if this would be like something that uh like the depression and that like feeling like we're not like not even wanting to or like don't know how to seek out God or whatever. It's just kind of like a way the enemy is working. Like assuming that that's like if we're having that kind of feeling of like I keep wanting to say laziness. Now you've said that because that is kind of how I pictured it too. But if you are kind of feeling that, just like oh, like man, I got to go mass today, or like man, I haven't prayed at all in the last week. But like the national championships on tonight or whatever. Like it's like um, is this like the enemy working in us? Is this like is that I'm assuming all devices are, but is that kind of where that's coming from?
So, yes and no. We don't want to always say, like, well, my sinful inclinations are only because the enemy is working against
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Yes, the enemy is always working against us, and all of the seven deadly sins, like, come from hell itself. They come from the enemy.
Hmm.
However, we do play a large part in being susceptible to those sins. So, I think a great analogy for this is if I am eating fast food for every meal, every day of the week, and then I'm invited to a great, beautiful feast with like luxurious, exotic, more complex foods,
Hmm.
I might not have the appetite for those things because I've been giving myself junk. And so,
Yeah.
in the same way, we might be experiencing that lack of desire and zeal. Yes, because the enemy does tempt us to that, and he tries to keep us away from the sacraments and from prayer at all costs. But if we are filling ourselves with the world,
Hmm.
we will not be hungry for what is above and what is spiritual.
Gotcha. So really, if anything, it would root back to the fall, like root back to like when sin was entered into the world, and like we are now broken. Um, if I'm like, I feel like sloth can be something for me sometimes that's just something that like is part of my broken nature. Someone
Hmm.
else who doesn't struggle with it doesn't mean they're less broken. They just may be broken in more of a lust way, or they may be broken in more of a prideful way, or something. So
Of
that
course.
I was kind of picturing like us all being broken, like literally shattered, and then put back
Hmm.
together, but someone took a few pieces, and so we're not kind of fully put together. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, so which piece am I missing? Like which part am
For
I?
sure.
Because that's what I feel like is the has been the toughest thing is going through these. Is sometimes I feel like I'm all these vices, which I guess we probably all are to a certain extent, a
Yes.
lot more than others, but yeah, slothfulness has been one for me even before I got like deeper into it, or before we get any deeper into it, like I felt like was something that I can fall into. It's just kind of that kind
Hmm.
of spiritual, just sluggishness. Just I
Hmm.
don't know. Now, is this also a worldly thing as well? Like,
Oh,
would the
yes.
device itself reflect on like if you're at work and you're just like I just like ugh like I don't want to do
Mm,
anything and you're literally being slothful, or like you get home and you're turning on the TV and you're just sitting there mindlessly scrolling. I guess would be the big one for most people. Is this
hmm.
also the same vice?
So, yes and no. What's interesting is Peter Kreeft says that like sloth is the sin of modernity, and it's because you would think it'd be the opposite. You would think
Yeah.
a culture inundated with sloth would be a culture that does nothing.
Mhm.
But it's the opposite. We actually make
Mhm.
ourselves so completely busy with
Yeah.
all of the wrong things that then we stop pursuing the spiritual things. So
Mm.
he says that it's like we're running both from the absence, like we're trying to run away from the absence that we experience within ourselves, and
Mhm.
we're also running away from the presence of God. So
Mhm.
we're just running. So a slothful society looks like ours, where everybody's overly
Yeah.
busy, we're running everywhere, and we are so active, but we are active with what is horizontal, and we're not
Mm.
preoccupying ourselves with what is vertical.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it's like, well, what's that? What is it? Wally that I think it
I
portrays this
never
very
saw
well.
that movie.
Okay, so basically, I think it's basically this robot, and it's on Earth, and it's just like, where's everybody, or what? Maybe it's on Earth, it's on some planet, but it finally like kind of finds itself on this little like space station, and
Hmm.
they have like advanced so much of society that everybody has these chairs that they fly around in, and they can literally order their food, and it's delivered straight to them.
Ugh.
They never have to get up. The TV is like literally like
Yeah.
right on their face as they're laying back, and everyone obviously is just super overweight and everything, but to them, it's like we have advanced so far. Like we have come so
Yes.
far as society. Me and Lindsay talk about that a lot. Of just like with every advancement, it's like we advance to a great spot, but then we keep going. We take it too far, and it's like now we're just
Yes.
being lazy. Like electric cars are great. Like we can help save the environment or whatever. But like the ones that drive themselves, like okay, I think we're taking this too far a little bit.
Totally.
But yeah,
For
gotcha. So
sure. Hmm.
yeah, because this one is interesting. I feel like most people would think that like sloth would just be laziness,
Hmm.
but I guess that I could see. So use an example. Like I've had like spurts at work where it's just like, oh man, like this is not what I want to do. But I have found like that the second I can either get out and go into like prayer time, even though it's sometimes hard to do, or if I can leave and go down to like Holy Family for noon mass or something, it's like it can kind of like reignite you a little bit and kind of get you going again. So I guess I don't know if I want to continue with sloth and kind of move in a little bit too of like kind of what are some like practical steps for getting out of sloth. I mean
Hmm. Hmm.
that would be it, I guess, a little bit, but
Yeah, well, and I think going back to something that a point you made earlier when as you reflect upon the seven deadly sins, you're like, oh, I feel like I'm susceptible to all of these.
mhm,
Well, they actually are all completely interwoven.
yeah,
So a really interesting point that Kreeft points out is that if you're susceptible to sloth, then you also might be susceptible to lust. Because if you're not filling yourself with what is infinite, then you're going to seek the pleasures here below. And so
mm,
maybe you're going to fall into lust. But then also
yeah,
you might fall into gluttony as well. Oh, I'm
mm,
so like, we have a God-shaped hole within our
yeah,
hearts. We just do. God made us that way because he made us for himself.
mhm,
And we sloth is a sin because it kills love within the heart. It kills
mhm,
charity. It deadens the soul because sloth is when we believe that our highest good is not our good. When we
yeah,
believe that the highest joy is not joy at all. And
yeah,
that could be for any number of reasons because
mhm,
it involves sacrifice, it involves death to self, it involves um, having to look away from the earth for a moment and to look
mhm,
towards heaven and to do the hard things.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I would say that sloth is this interesting thing where it's not like a direct sin that we're committing, where
mhm,
like a sin of commission, like I'm murdering somebody, that's a sin.
yeah,
Sloth is the sin of omission. So I'm actually just like being passive and I'm not pursuing what God is inviting me to pursue, which is ultimately Himself.
yeah. Oh wow. We had a good maybe a good example of that is we had a guy just recently considering the Catholic Church, and he kind of got to the point where he's like, "This is my only hang up," and then that hang up was kind of answered, like that objection, and he's like, "Okay, like I know I need to become this," and then someone
Mm,
Gerald who said. Delayed obedience is still disobedience, and I thought that was such a great that was this like that story popped in my mind when you were saying that. Just like
sure.
this thought of like um yeah, God calling you to something, calling you to act, but then you it's one thing I think if you're like I'm not sure, like I feel like
Hmm.
I'm kind of in this stage of life right now where it's I'm not 100% sure where I'm being called to, but like I feel like sometimes it is like they directly call you to something and then it's like but I don't know if I want to do that or
Sure.
not.
Sure.
Yeah,
Hmm.
man, it's sloth. It's the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, man, this can be me sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes I'm like
Sure.
I'll be humble, but not very humble. No,
Sure.
but yeah. Okay, so if someone so someone's listening and they're like, man, this is me, like this is me,
Mhm.
like I feel like I can be slothful sometimes. Where do you start with this, like where do you start? Because
Yeah,
that's kind of the how I kind of see this series going. It's kind of getting a kind of a definition of this, what sloth is, and then you can also stop me too if you there's more you want to go into in sloth, but then also then getting into practical steps too, because defining it's one thing, but then getting into
for
someone's
sure.
recognized and now, okay, that's me. Like
Mhm.
I feel like you're talking straight to me. What do I do? Like
For
how do
sure.
I kind of get out of this?
Yeah. So again, so sloth is that sorrow at pursuing the good, pursuing God. So, and again, like this manifests in ways in which we make ourselves busy and active with
Mhm,
things of the world. We become too attached to the world because we're not seeking heaven.
mhm,
What's interesting is, again, I'm literally stealing everything from Peter Kraft. He says the remedy for sloth is actually faith. It's not that I start being active and I start
yeah,
like doing a bunch of things for the church, but that I actually just believe that God has
mhm,
revealed himself, that
yeah,
he is who he says he is, and that he loves me. And actually, like, um, and you probably understand this very well as a husband,
mhm,
we do some of our greatest things when we are motivated by love.
yeah,
So when you do the best things for Lindsay, the great sacrifices that you make for her, it's because you love her. And you
mhm,
might have like some sudden moments where you look at her and you're just like, I love her and
mhm,
I want to serve her and do all the things for her. And
yeah,
the same way, when we believe that God is real and he loves us and he's seeking us, going to the sacraments, going to prayer, those are all in and of themselves acts of faith. When I sit down to
yeah,
pray, I can't see God, but I'm making an act of faith
mhm,
by speaking to him and by listening to him. And so I would say to any listeners out here who are like, "Oh, I struggle with sloth. I'm sad. I'm sorrowful about like that I cannot find my highest good on earth." And
mhm,
prayer and going to the sacraments and going to mass just like that depresses me.
mhm,
I would say remake an act of faith. God, I
yeah,
believe in you. I love you. I want to follow you.
mhm,
Help me to have faith. Help me to believe and help me to respond to all the ways in which you are pursuing me because God has
yeah,
beautifully revealed himself to be a bridegroom. Jesus
mhm,
calls himself the bridegroom. He wants to unite himself to us totally and completely. And that's the invitation that awaits for us on the other side of sloth.
yeah. Yeah, I like the analogy that people use too, which kind of comes to mind when you're saying that. Is that like it's kind of like when you're in the ocean. It's like God's there, but it's like something you're in the ocean. The current like takes you away, takes you down. All of a sudden, you get out, and you're like, wait, where'd our campsite go? And you're just kind of like,
Mm-hmm,
oh, I've
mm-hmm.
been taken down this way. That for me has been like what I feel like when I can't fall into these seasons or these few days of sloth or weeks of sloth. It's like typically I find that that's just usually a wake up call to like, hey, like you've kind of drifted, like like from
For
your
sure.
yeah. And I love how you bring up the faith, like the opposing virtue being diligence, but like faith is
Mm-hmm.
the opposite. And if you're struggling in that aspect, like you're not going, yeah, you're obviously not going to seek what you
Yes.
are maybe either struggling to believe or struggling to, I don't know, like to like I know some people have been asking lately, of like how do we even listen to God and what God's calling us to
Mm,
do. So if
sure.
we're being slothful, but because we're not supposed to, or we're not doing what God's calling us to do, how do we like know what God's calling us to do?
For
And
sure.
like going into the sacraments for sure. I'm doing the 33-day Eucharistic glory
Cool.
consecration
Mm-hmm.
Eucharistic glory by Matthew Kelly, and it
Mm-hmm.
basically is a ton of this, like keeping your
Mm-hmm.
eyes on heaven. And it talks about how like we're all on a pilgrimage right now, like we're all just like in this life. And I believe there actually was a chapter. I should have brought it. I don't think I have it, but I should have brought it. But it talked about when you are feeling kind of like slothful or just I don't even know if it was specifically talking about that, but just like kind of just off your game. Typically, just kind of getting yourself realigned, like realign back, and just
Mm-hmm.
remembering like we're pilgrims, kind of on
Mm-hmm.
our journey to heaven, and reminding
Mm-hmm.
ourselves like don't get too comfortable. Like when you
Yes.
go on a pilgrimage, you don't. go into a town, and I think he actually uses the Camino as an example. Like, go to the Camino and get to one town and just be like, oh, cool, and you just set up shop and unpack
Mm-hmm.
your bag and put it in drawers and stuff. It's like, no, no, no. It's like, don't get too comfortable. We're not staying here very long,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
kind of keeping that mindset of like we're pilgrims,
Yes,
not tourists. Like tourists set up
absolutely.
shop and put everything in, and I was like, that's a good way to think about it. I like that.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. And sloth is so central to our modern culture right now because when you say that God doesn't exist and you eradicate him from culture,
mhm.
then there's no meaning to anything. And you end
Yeah,
up with a lot of people wandering around thinking, why am I here? What is the meaning of my
yeah,
existence? Where am I headed? So they don't even know that they're pilgrims. And then that's when sloth takes hold. I don't even know that God exists, or I don't even believe he exists. So, so yeah, why would I look for him?
yeah.
And the beautiful thing is that Jesus says, if you look, if you seek, you're going to find. So,
Mhm,
so faith, we should believe in God,
mhm.
but then we got to look for him.
Yeah,
So if we want to counteract sloth, we've got to look for him. And the beautiful thing is, if you look for him, you're going to find him because God doesn't hide himself from us. He loves us too much to hide himself.
mhm.
He's always waiting and ready to meet us the moment we start looking for him.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've always heard. I think one of my favorites is because I'm bad at this too, which maybe plays into all this. This episode's for me, everybody. It's not for anybody else. Uh, but this is actual. This is actual just me. I just need to talk to Tara about this. I just guys, we're not even recording
I'm
right
happy to be
now.
here.
Yeah. No. So in those times where people are like, yeah, I just feel like I'm struggling. I don't know what God's calling me to be, or I don't know. I don't hear God talking to me or something. 'Cause I
Mm,
know you've been a focus missionary for a while now, and you've
mhm.
probably walked through with people through this kind of this problem before. What do
Yep.
you start with people there, like if they're not hearing? Because I know the one thing is they say God speaks to you in silence, and I know that's
Mm,
another thing with today's society, which is really hard, is to get into
mhm.
silence. And the other day, I felt really I decided it's like, okay, I want to be more knowledgeable. Kind of your apologetics thing. I want to be more knowledgeable, and I was like, I want to start. And actually, I think I like searched those like which books should a Catholic start with to become more knowledgeable. And they said
Nice.
number one thing, Imitation of Christ. And I was like, oh great, I have
Mm,
that. And I've read it before, but I read it early
mhm.
on into converting, and I didn't get any of it. So now reading it, I'm just like, how did I not get this? But so I started reading it again. First few sections are literally like, don't try to be the most knowledgeable person, and encourage like to get out and be in silence. God speaks in silence, and then
Yes.
so I put those section down, and I went to the Eucharistic glory thing, and the same thing, like get in silence. And so I just like literally went out, made coffee, and sat on my porch like a couple weeks ago, and it was
Mhm.
kind of nice, kind of cool, and I was just like, this is super nice. Just sat out there in silence, and
Yep.
now, and this kind of getting back to that question I just asked because
Yep.
God didn't necessarily like I wasn't sitting out there and now I'm gonna tell you I had this big revelation, but
Mhm.
I just felt like so at peace. Like felt
Mhm.
everything felt slower, everything felt
Mhm.
calmer. Especially my mind can just be like and just going all the time. But it felt
Mhm.
super, super calm. And so I guess that started with my recommendations to kind of get into silence. But what do you go with people when they're like what do you like how what do you mean God talks to you? Like what do you mean? How does that
Totally. Yeah. So I think that you're off to a great start is well,
happen?
first you got to eradicate all that noise in your life.
Yeah.
I think I told this to a group of women maybe like a year or two ago of Bible study. I was like, actually, your prayer life is deeply, deeply, deeply affected by what happens outside of the chapel. If you
Mhm.
are inundated with noise outside of the chapel, it's gonna be really, really hard to go sit down and be quiet for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think just being attentive to, are you prone to have the TV going or music going or whatever it is?
Yeah.
So inviting that silence into your life. But I also think a really, really obvious way that we miss God's voice is that He gave us His word in the Bible and
Yeah.
we don't read it.
Mhm.
I'm like, if you want to know what God has to say to you, go to the Gospels. That's what Jesus has to say to you. You want to know what you're supposed to do? Jesus literally tells you in the
Mm,
Gospels.
yeah.
And if you've never read scripture before, I would say, great, awesome. Sit down. Whoop, headphone came out because I'm getting way too excited over here. Like, I would say sit down and start with the Gospels.
Yeah.
Just start reading, and I think too, discernment of spirits is super important when being able to hear God's voice. And so when you're in silence, being able to recognize my voice, the enemy's voice, and God's voice.
Mhm.
And I think a really great way of knowing God's voice is what effect does it have on you?
Mhm.
Is the voice accusing you? Is the voice leading you to virtue? Is the voice leading you to peace, to love, to the fruits of the Holy Spirit?
Mhm.
And those are ways by which we can discern, like, yeah, oftentimes if you're going to hear God's voice interiorly, it's going to sound like your own voice,
Yeah.
but it can still be the enemy. It can still just be you, and it can still just be God. So
Yeah.
being able to discern, okay, what is this stirring in my heart? Is this of God? Is it leading me from God, or is it just me?
Yeah.
So I would say like scripture and then being able to discern those spirits on top of bringing more silence into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually did a video on that. One of my thoughts with Josh was, and like I always say, it's not like a theological. This is like just my own thoughts, and actually, most of
Yeah.
it came from a talk Father Elkin did, but
Hmm.
was on that exact thing. It was like I think the title of it's kind of like it's. I'll put it in the description, but it's like knowing the voices in your head or something like that. Uh,
Hmm.
because I can get into prayer life and then all of a sudden feel like I'm mm, like no, like I think I should do this and I should do this, and it's just like oh, that's my own voice. Like, I think I'm wanting to do
Hmm.
that for my own, uh, like, for out of pride, or I'm wanting to do this because, like, it'll look good on me, or I don't know. Like, so
Sure.
but kind of really getting, like, kinda quiet and slowing down. And then the other thing I was thinking when you were saying that was Saint Jose Maria Escriva talked about getting into silence as well, and he
Hmm.
talked about to not expect like the big like transformation like you start floating and God like speaks directly to you or like the bush catches on fire and talks to you. Don't expect that, but you got to prep yourself to be spoken to like that. And I had a story recently where I was struggling with some stuff, and I was just like I don't know, it had been one of those things that kind of like I don't know. Well, I think the enemy was working in my head of like, you can do this yourself. You don't need help with it.
Mm.
And I was sitting in an Acts team meeting, and a guy was doing. And I'm not. This isn't to say like because I did all these other steps we're talking about perfectly. I don't know why this happened. I think it was just God telling, like, finally shaking me down and saying like, okay, we're gonna fix this. But I was in this Acts meeting. The guy that was talking, I don't even remember exactly what he said beforehand, but I just remember him saying something of like, I wasn't being a man, I was being like cowardice or something like that. And I just like all of a sudden just was like, ooh, and like just felt like it really did feel like Space Jam when the talent leaves their body. But I felt like whoa, and it was just like go to confession, tell Branson, tell your wife, and I was just like
Yeah.
whoa, and I was like, and I literally like got up and left the meeting. But it was one of those things where it was so clear.
Yeah.
And that's the only, but I would say that's the only time I've ever experienced something that absolutely like kind of chilling, like shake you down type direction from it. And I even think God knew me in a sense of like, I know you're going to struggle going to confession with Father Elkin and Father Ditzel, like people you know, um, but also in the position I'm in work, like I know all the priests, so I'm like gonna, I don't know, I may struggle to go to Holy Family and go to like people, and not saying you should. I actually typically like to go to Father Elkin for the big stuff to kind of put myself in a little bit more uncomfortable spot of like go to him if it's big. You can go to whoever you want if it's something you just like you're trying to. You haven't been in a while, but I went up there and I was like, whoever's there, I'm just going in. I don't care. And I got there and it was some random priest I've never seen before. And he sat there like this with his eyes closed the whole time, and when he held a rosary in his hand, just kind of fiddled with it the whole time. Yeah, I had no clue who it was. Branson, I told Branson about him and stuff. Branson had no clue who he was either. And I was like, it was Saint Joseph or something. I don't know, but I was like, it was probably just some guest priest. But yeah, but I had this clear moment of God speaking to me, and I think it must have been because like of the work that I feel like Branson's been helping me with, of like walking through and going to these spirituality series and learning from Father Elkin and kind of prepping myself for that stuff, and it felt great, but I don't know. There's something about it though where I was like, I don't know if I should expect this all the time. Or like if someone's not experiencing that, it's not
Hmm.
necessarily like, oh well, you're not as good as me. It's just that I think God.
Sure.
I think if anything, I think that wasn't a form of like I was in a great place, so God spoke to me. I think it was actually the opposite. I think it was in a really bad place, and God finally just
Mm-hmm.
grabbed me, and the Holy Spirit was like smacked me around for a second and was like,
Mm-hmm.
you're going, you're gonna do it." And so finally just got up and went. But
Mm-hmm.
that whole long tangent around to say, what about those people who are like, well, I'm trying and I'm practicing. Okay, we've been working with you for a couple weeks now, and it's like I still don't know, like I still don't feel like God's speaking to me in these moments. How do you encourage them to keep going?
Sure. Well, question for you, Josh.
Yeah,
Would you say that your communication with Lindsay has developed and grown over time since you've been married?
yeah, absolutely.
Why do
Yeah,
you think that is?
I think some of it. I think it's because there's the honeymoon phase
Mm-hmm.
where um there's not much that she could say. Like she could say, like, I want to get rid of the TV, or what, like I want to go on walks all the time and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, anything for you. And then you start living together, and then you're starting to like want to kind of get back to your own ways. And so I feel like the communication's really good, and then it kind of comes down when you come out of that honeymoon phase. I feel like that's when the real stuff starts to happen, like that 2 years, 3 years in. Sometimes maybe it's earlier for people, but you get to this point where it's like the communication aspect becomes necessary because you do get in your normal little tiffs. And
Mm-hmm.
when we were trying to grow in our faith, obviously everything points back to that. And so we wanted to make sure we were trying to have these conversations and grow together, kind of walk with each other, since our goal is to get each other to heaven. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I also converted early on in our relationship. So it was one of those things where it's like I had to actually kind of learn how to like guide the family and be that spiritual head. But I think a lot of it's just out of like mistakes. Like we didn't
Mm-hmm.
communicate well on this, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like we got a little tiff, and it's like you've got to tell me when you are gonna blah blah blah, and it's like okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm sorry, yes I do, I need to, and then the next time it's like, ooh, if I'm gonna do this, I need let me talk to Lindsay first, and so it's kind of
Yeah.
like out of the mistakes first.
Totally. So you've had to work at it over time. You've
Yeah.
had to work at it a lot, and you've
Oh yeah.
worked at it oftentimes because you've erred or she's erred, and
Mhm.
then you have to kind of resolve things and come back together as a couple.
Yeah.
I think the same thing is with the Lord. So
Mhm.
we, one, God often doesn't give us these like big, showy signs or loud audible voices because
Mhm.
he knows it'll make us prideful and
Yeah.
he'll think that we did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so often he's like, hey, so again, as I mentioned, he's a bridegroom. He calls us quietly and gently and he waits for us.
Yeah.
And the question is, are we willing to go meet him every day all the time and make it about him and
Yeah.
not about us? So
Yeah.
if you think about it, a lot of times when people are like, I can't hear God's voice, it's about them. I can't hear God's voice. I don't feel at peace. I'm not getting anything out of prayer. Well, is it about you or is it about him?
Yeah.
And so again, you and Lindsay are able to communicate when you're like, hey, we're thinking about our marriage, we're thinking about our family. You probably
Mhm.
communicate best when you're thinking about the needs of the other and
Yeah.
not your own needs.
Yeah.
And so in the same way in prayer, am I going to prayer because I love God? I want to give him my time. He deserves my time because he's given me my existence, my life, my everything.
Mhm.
And am I going because I want to freely love him and worship him? And actually, it doesn't matter how he makes me feel in that time or
Mhm.
if I hear his voice. Will I go to him even if I don't hear his voice for years and years and years? Will I still keep going because he is God? And I think a lot of times that's what it comes down to in prayer. Are you getting in the way? Is that why you can't hear him? Because you're getting in the way, your own sin or your own desires for consolation or good feelings? A lot of times that stuff is the reason why we can't hear his voice.
Yeah.
Um, but then also, like in scripture, when the prophet Elijah, goes to hear the voice of God, he doesn't hear it in the earthquake. He doesn't hear it in the
Mhm.
storm. He hears in the quiet whispering of the wind. And so
Mhm.
God also, he again goes back to that silence. If you want to hear the whisper, you've got to be still and you've
Mhm.
got to incline your ear and you have to say, speak, Lord, I'm listening. Help me to hear your voice. And if we ask God for the grace to hear him, we will. He will help us, undoubtedly. He wants us to hear him,
Yeah.
but he doesn't want us to love him for the gifts that he gives. He wants us to love him for himself and for himself only.
Yeah. That reminds me of something I heard. I think it may have been at Seek, and I can't remember what talk it was, but someone say like I don't know, I didn't get anything out of mass today, and they're like, okay, it's not about you. It's like
Yeah.
you did get exactly what you were supposed to get out of mass, which was the
Yes.
Eucharist.
Yes.
And I play prayer times that same in the Eucharistic glory thing. I should have brought that. I can't believe I didn't bring it, but well, it's in the other room, but the a lot of the days are about the Eucharist, but also just relationship with God, and how like when we can kind of be back on that pilgrim, like being on a pilgrimage and not tourist, we can focus on the only thing that matters, which is being in the presence of God. We're on a pilgrimage, yeah, to be with God. Hopefully, that's our goal.
Mm-hmm.
So in the present, right now, is it good enough to just be with God, like be in prayer and be
Mm,
with God? And so
yes.
and Mother Teresa, I love her when they asked her, it's like, when you go to prayer, what do you say? And she goes, nothing, I just listen. It's like, what does he
Mm-hmm.
say? Nothing, he just listens. And it's like, so many people are like, okay, she's crazy. But the more and more I bring it up in different interviews and stuff, it just makes so much more sense of just like
Mm-hmm.
half the time prayer for me is just going in there to like, just, just sit there and take a deep breath and just be like, oh,
Sure.
thank goodness. Okay.
Yes.
Whew, just this is a place where my mind isn't running and racing and saying like I need to do A, B, and C, and here's my to-do list
Yes.
today. This is a place where it's like, hey, if you want to break from that, like I'm here, I'm waiting. If you want to break from that, so.
Yes. 100%. Mm-hmm.
Well, on the opposite side, the opposing extreme side, I know this is probably the side I know when I'm thinking about it, I thought about the least. But
Mm-hmm.
is the workaholism side
Yes.
being kind of the opposite? Um, Obviously, in a worldly sense, that one also makes sense. Like if you're thinking
Mm-hmm.
back to sloth from a worldly sense, you're just kind of being lazy. But then all of a sudden, you're like, okay, I'm fired up, and then it's like, oh, now I'm like working 12 hours a day. Um, is there a spiritual version of this?
100%.
No.
Yeah, it would probably be the heresy of Pelagianism, which is the belief that we can earn or work for our salvation,
Oh,
which sometimes, unfortunately, non-Catholics can think that that is what we do as Catholics because
mhm.
we hold faith and works together.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, we can fall into this idea that if I do a lot of things for the Lord, it will make me holier.
Hmm.
I'll progress in the spiritual life faster, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of like, well, and what's underneath that is pride. I will do this. I will save myself. I will
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. Look how many hours I prayed today. Look how many rosaries I said.
Yeah.
Look how much I served the poor. So yeah, the flip side of sloth is disordered zeal. It's zeal now that actually is not really turned to the Lord. It's turned towards self, I think,
Mhm.
would be the other side of sloth.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's what I I was talking to someone about one time where they had talked about their mom finding out later on in life that she did a rosary every single day for every one of her kids, and she had 6 kids. And I was like, holy moly! But he's like, I didn't find out until I was like 30 something, 40 something. I was
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
oh, that's so cool. Like that's cool because I could see there being a temptation there to just be like, yeah,
Yes.
every day I do 6 rosaries for each one of my sons. But he's like, no, none of us ever knew about it. Like she just did it. Like
Hmm.
it was
Hmm.
all she was doing a lot that
Hmm.
if pride would have snuck in there, it'd have been like, oh, now it's workaholism. It's like, or
Yeah.
could potentially be workaholism. And yeah, because I was thinking about that too when we first before we started recording. It's just like, man, how can you do too much? And then my
Mm.
sense of going and doing too much. I guess we won't be doing the Q and A's. My phone died. But my sense of doing
Darn.
there are a couple I remember, but my sense of doing like too much was when I thought about it was like if I was and we've had me and Lindsay have had these conversations too where it's like, okay, I'm gonna be on the Acts team. I'm going to That Man Is You. I'm leading a Bible study now, and I'm going to go to Sunday night basketball and fellowship with those people. I'm going to try to get coffee with my people for my Bible study once a month. And all of a sudden, your schedule is so jam packed that you're actually neglecting your number one vocation. And
Yep.
you're all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, you're doing all that, and all that's good, but you're neglecting what your actual vocation is, and so you're kind of you're disordered and
Hmm.
Father Castle used that word a ton of just
Hmm.
disorder when
Hmm.
it comes to pride and humility, with humility being the reordering it. But yeah, that one's one for me. I know like today's society, when you mention workaholism, everyone's like, oh yeah, my brother's that, my dad's that, my uncle's that, or whatever. And they know of somebody that's like that. But that may be something to reflect on for people to see, like, where am I maybe doing
For
a little
sure.
too much and neglecting my own prayer life or neglecting my vocation, my family, my whatever it is.
For sure. And I believe it's the Institute for Priestly Formation in Nebraska came out with this acronym that we talked a lot about in Focus. Um, living RIM versus living MIR. So RIM versus MIR.
Oh, okay.
So living relationship identity mission, which means that I properly order my intimacy with Jesus first. So I go to Jesus. Jesus tells me who I am. The Father tells me who I am. You are my beloved with whom I am well pleased. He tells me who I am. And then because he has told me who I am, then he can send me on my mission. But a lot of times we missionaries do the opposite. Well,
Mm-hmm.
if I do a lot on mission, that gives me my identity, which tells me that I am right with God.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first one is what Jesus did. The first thing he does to inaugurate his public ministry is he's baptized. And God
Mm-hmm.
says, this is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased before he's done anything, before he's even gone to his paschal mystery. We see Jesus doing tons and tons and tons of stuff. He heals, he's bringing people back from the dead, he's preaching, he's teaching. But
Mm-hmm.
always there's a balance, there's an ebb and flow if you watch him in the scriptures where he's out and then he's alone on the mountaintop with the Father.
Yeah.
He's
Mm-hmm.
out and then he's up like at the rise at dawn praying
Yeah.
alone with God. And so it's okay if we're doing a lot. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say that. That's okay. It's okay if we're doing a lot, if we're doing a lot because God has told us to do a lot because we know that from our own intimacy with him.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if we're talking about St. Teresa of Calcutta, the sisters, when they first started Missionaries of Charity, they said, Mother, we have so much to do, we cannot pray for an hour every day.
Mm-hmm.
And St. Teresa would say, yes, and that's why we have to pray for 2 hours every day, because there is so much to do. So if you're doing a lot for the church or you're doing a lot of ministries or activities, great. That better be showing within your own intimacy with Jesus. Are you
Yeah.
praying as much as you are out serving, working, etc.?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good way to be able to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Good balance. Yeah. I remember that one too. That there's always those quotes that stick with you, and that if you
Yeah.
don't have time to pray an hour, pray 2 hours, and which is funny because nowadays, like, if you want to like really help somebody, it's like just start with 10 minutes, start with 15
I
minutes.
know, right?
Mother Teresa's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, if you're in my content or whatever, like we're gonna get up early. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, and there's never that reason that doesn't happen. I was a personal trainer for so long, and personal training, which I think this is gonna be my thoughts with Josh for this week, but personal training and the spiritual life are so similar.
Mm.
The number one excuse typically I feel like for not doing like a holy hour every day is I don't have time, or even a
Yep.
holy hour every week. We'll say that for like for people like is I don't have time, and it's like you do have time because like what are you doing at 5 a.m. or what are you doing at 6 a.m. Or 9 p.m. You do have time, but it's not high enough on your priority list.
Right.
And then the one of my favorite quotes as a personal trainer I used to use all the time, and now I get to use it with people. But is that we used to say, just come, just show up. I know you don't want to come. I know you don't want to work out today, but just show up because no one's ever regretted a workout they've done. No one's ever left a
Totally.
workout and been like, I shouldn't have done that. It's like the same thing
Totally.
with prayer life. No one's ever shown up and done prayer
Oh
life
yeah,
or gone to mass or done this stuff and been like, I wish I would have done that.
for sure.
If anything, it's just gonna put everything into perspective. It's like I'm not as busy as I thought I was, or all of a
Hmm.
sudden you're gonna see God's grace is poured out, and you're gonna be like, wow, I got that stuff done a lot faster than I thought I was
Oh yes.
gonna.
He multiplies our time when we give it to him. When we're
Yeah,
like, okay, God, I'm gonna make this sacrifice. He's like, awesome. I'll give you more time. He does it miraculously.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's the things like, what are the things we're willing to give up? I know that I talked with some guys that love sports, and I was watching this podcast, and I was telling them about it, and I said, this person suggested because for men we love our sports, and when we got
Hmm.
the national championship on the day that we're recording this, national championship games tonight, the Super Bowl's coming up and everything. And so there are gonna be so many reasons. I mean, it's Super Bowl Sunday too, so some people are like, "Well, I gotta prep and I gotta do this." And it's like, don't you dare skip mass. But or like when you go to mass, like be there, be present. Don't be thinking about what you're doing for the rest of the day.
Hmm.
But they would say like a good like thing you could practice is to skip the first quarter. And like,
Mm.
how does that make you feel when that's like asked of you? And like, or
Hmm.
even like skip the kickoff. I used to like be like, oh my gosh, we gotta hurry home. Like the Oklahoma City Thunder's about to tip off. If I miss the tip off, I'm gonna be so mad. It's like nothing happens in an NBA game for the first quarter anyway. So, but it was like, whoa, as I knock everything over. But it was like putting everything into perspective and like making
Hmm.
sure everything is well ordered because yeah,
For sure.
once everything gets out of order, it gets out of whack. Like the God family, and even again, God family business is what we always say, but like God family, everything else, and
Right.
those get out of order, and it's just like it gets out of whack pretty quick.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah. Well, any last little tips before I see if I can pull up the Q&As?
Mm, I'm looking at my notes. I
Please.
wrote a lot of notes. Um, no, I don't think so. I think I said pretty much what I would have wanted to say from my
Nice.
notes.
Nice. Okay, I think my live is still going on just on my computer.
Oh, I'm gonna
I
adjust
like
my
I told
chair.
everybody, this is a new thing. We're trying, so I'm gonna try this out. And if this is a hot mess, we're just not gonna do it again.
Love it.
Let's see here. I bet. Oh, here's the chat. Oh, sweet. Okay, can you still see me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so um, let's see. Okay, so someone asked. These are questions. Oh, and by the way, you guys don't forget before we jump into this. Don't forget to subscribe. But also don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. We have a monthly newsletter going out. The January one will be going out here this next week. Next week, so it'll go out towards the end of the month. Kind of reflecting on this one will reflect on last year, and then kind of what's coming up. So sign up for that, and it'll be in the bio below. But then also, if you want to support the channel, we've got all sorts of new things we're coming out with soon. We'll kind of wait to announce some of them until it's official, but we're going to have tons of stuff for you guys to take with your prayer time, including custom specialized rosaries for the channel. So if you guys become a member and support the channel, you guys actually get a custom rosary that we have. Like my priest from my home parish is going to bless all of them before we send them to you. So yeah, so think about that. Consider that helping us continue to grow and reach more people. But okay, we're gonna jump into these questions and then we will wrap it up. So someone asked, what are your views on Orthodox sect of Christianity?
In what way? It's not a very specific question.
Next question. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I did say that. I kind of said the same thing. I said it seems like a very vague question. I don't think I'm the best person to answer this, but it seems like a vague question. But it says, well, I myself, being an Orthodox Christian, do not believe in some of the practices. Like I'm still confused between Catholic faith and Orthodox faith, which one to
Mm.
practice. So I said
Oh,
practice
sure.
Catholic faith, but yeah, but that was his. Um, well, then he did also mention in the end, it doesn't matter if you are a follower of Christ. But we
Hmm.
talk in general. We all Christians, but this guy's from Europe. We all Christians, but get
Okay.
united because our strength lies in unity. Else, we are all going to get replaced by some external force or so-called multiculturalism.
Okay.
Um, but
I think I understand.
yeah. There you go.
Doesn't have much to do with sloth, which is
No, I know.
completely okay.
I think it started with when I started the live like 10 minutes before we were going on, and so they're like, "What do you think about this?" And I'm like, "Okay." So it's random questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I would say, what do I think about Orthodox Christianity? I would say, well, a lot of what it comes down to is our understanding of history, and our understanding of history says that the Orthodox Church split off from the Catholic Church in 1054 in the Great Schism,
Mhm.
and still has a valid priesthood. However, Orthodoxy is not in communion with Rome. And we want everybody to be in communion with Rome. Why?
Mhm.
Because that is where the seat of Peter is. It is through apostolic succession, we have the fullness of truth, the fullness of Christianity in the Catholic Church. And so we say, oh, to our Orthodox brothers and sisters, come home to Rome. You're so close, is what I would say. You're so, so, so close.
Yeah.
And we love our Orthodox brothers and sisters. But we want you to be in communion with Rome, simply because it goes back to the 12 apostles. including St. Peter. So I think that's probably the shortest
Mhm.
answer that I could give. I totally agree on the points of unity.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I just recently saw a podcast. The comedian John Christ, who's like an evangelical Christian comedian. So he's super funny. He kind of makes all sorts of jokes just on all sorts of different like religion and stuff like that, stereotypes and everything. But he had Matt Fradd on his show.
Mm.
It's so funny. But he's at one point said, "I mean, we're basically the same company, different divisions. Would you say that?" And Matt Fradd was like, "Nope, I wouldn't say that." But he goes, "But let me tell you that. Let me say this though. It's like we're companies, two different companies going after the same thing, and we've got all the tools to succeed, and you guys have got most of them." And I was like,
Hmm.
"That's a good way to think about it." He's like, "We love what you guys are doing. We love your mission. We love that you guys are trying to follow Jesus and everything. We just don't think you've got quite the fullness of the truth." And he encouraged
Totally.
Catholics to not be so, because Catholics can sometimes come across as so like uh, I don't know, like judgmental of other people. We should love anyone
Sure.
that's seeking out Jesus, and if
Sure.
anything, we should be wanting to be there to help them through kind of the I don't know the help them through kind of the understanding into the fullness. So
For
uh,
sure.
cool. This person says, "My question is, can you give me a shout out?" No. um,
That poor person.
I just
Sorry.
need King McGrew. Shout out to King McGrew. I was just kidding, King McGrew. I couldn't help it. Okay, someone said, and like I said, some of these are not even about Sloth, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Should I read, as a Catholic, should I read the documents of Vatican II?
100% yes. Ah, gosh. Many of our misconceptions about Vatican II come from the fact that we don't actually read the documents that the council produced.
Yeah.
So if you read the documents, you will understand more of what the spirit of Vatican II was. I myself have read a few of them, and they are incredibly brilliant. So I actually think I have a book down here, Documents of Vatican II.
Oh,
That's
nice.
coming for me. So I
Nice.
highly encourage you, listener, whatever your name is. Yes, you should. And I would start with the documents that address scripture particularly.
Okay, nice. And
Hmm.
that question came from Gregorian Chant. Weird name, but an
Amazing.
interesting name. Okay, we'll finish with the last one, which is um, what is the number one advice you would give to your younger self?
My
Like
younger
growing up,
self.
your younger self growing up. So
My
like,
number one advice I would give to my younger
and
self
obviously we'll
growing
say
up.
like faithful advice. Like
Mm,
I'll start while you ponder.
yeah, you go.
Mine would be, and you and me have probably talked about this before, but mine would be that my whole thing is growing up through high school, junior high, high school, college, mainly more in late high school, college was like I went to all these really kind of I call them feel good churches where they were a lot of fun. The music was amazing. The pastors were always great speakers. Um, but I just found myself like, there's got to be more to this, but I would never seek any of that out. I was just like, there's got to
Mm,
be more to this. I just don't. I mean, it's fun, but I don't know. It almost felt too fun for church, and I was just like thinking like, not saying church shouldn't be fun, but like I was like there's got to be more to this. But I never sought it out, and so
yeah.
I would say if anything, if you have any questions about your faith, the Catholic faith, like just God in general and what He is, and Jesus and what He's called us to do, is to like follow that, like follow that urge to like have that when you have that question of like which one is right, which one is the right faith, or what does Jesus tell us in the Bible, like how we should live, like follow it, because I did not follow it for so long, and it took me till meeting Lindsay, her introduced me to Harrison Garlic and Father Elkin, who got me to OCIA, and then OCIA just naturally started answering those questions, and I
Hmm.
was like, oh, I've always thought like this seems so much more than what I've always thought. And then it kind of just, without me even asking, God was like, I'm going to answer those questions you've had in your head. Where I've
Hmm.
always thought there's got to be more, kind of with a question mark, or is there more? Then God, like I feel like now reflecting back, it was like God was in my ear telling me, hey, there's more to this, there's more to this, but I never saw any of it out. So
Yeah.
that'd be my big one.
I think that I would have told myself, God is enough. And um, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks.
Mm.
If you choose to love him and choose to forego, those worldly things or worldly desires or relationships or friendships that you know aren't going to lead you to God.
Mm,
They're not worth it. Go after God. He's enough and he'll take care of the rest. I probably would have told my younger self that because speaking of sloth, I just tried to fill myself with those things that
mm,
weren't God. Um, and guess what? They only led to sin.
mm.
And yeah, that'd probably be a change that I would have made. But again, God brings good out of all things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely something I've learned as well. Is kind of going through all this and like looking back and like seeing like, man, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have known this sooner. Or like the men at Christ the King say it all the time. It's like they come up to
mhm.
me and pray and say like, man, I wish that I was like you when I was your age. And I'm like, you should come
Mm,
to you to the college. Like I wish I was like
mhm.
them when I was their age, and the college kids
Yep.
say I wish I was like these elementary school kids when I was their age.
Yep.
And so it's just looking to see like being grateful for where you came from and being grateful for where God is or has brought you because
Yes.
yeah, everything along the way was kind of I feel like for me has just taught me how to kind of proceed and like what he's calling me to. So
100%. Yep, I agree.
well, awesome. Any thing else you got going on that you want to do? Like any like last plugs? You got Revival season 7,
Yes.
episode 1 out. When that's in the description, we'll put that in the description.
Yes.
What else? Do you have anything else you're working on or anything we
I
can
don't
pray for
know.
you?
Just stay tuned for more episodes from Tell Me About It, Tara,
Yeah.
and pray for the mission in New York. It's slow
Mhm.
going. There are a lot of there is a sleeping church up here and a lot of souls who do not know Jesus.
Yeah.
So yeah, just prayers for my own strength and courage as a missionary would be much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cool. And then prayers for me is just that kind of discernment with my next step in life. So I got just I don't know. There's a few things out there, but yeah, just whatever God's calling me to do that
Amen.
I am able to get in that silence that we talked about and kind of hear more like, hey, this is where I'm calling. This is what I'm calling you to,
Totally.
and then
Yep.
courage to take the step. So
Woo!
woo! Well, awesome. Well, guys, this is the second episode. The third episode, we will be kind of back to you on one more last prayer request. Is for Caleb Harlan, who was a Presbyterian pastor on campus, and he became Catholic, and with that came all sorts of turmoil. He was pushed out of the
Mm,
church, and everything, but he's just like bounced off. He's seen God's love so much in the Catholic Church. Him and his whole family has been awesome. The prayer request comes in as he was just like sideswiped in a car wreck, and he had a blood
mm,
clot in his arm and was rushed to the ER, and they had to get him to surgery to save his arm. Luckily, thanks be to God, everything went really great. They got the blood clot out. He can't currently move his left arm or his right leg, but the
wow.
doctors are very positive that nothing is permanent. So just continue to
Okay.
pray for his recovery, and then his boys that are kind of in the 8 to 12 range, I believe,
Mm,
who are seeing this and just kind of rattled by it, like, whoa, like
yeah.
they're not used to seeing their dad like this. So
Yeah.
pray for that family, and yeah, and then you guys can also comment below how we can pray for you, and then again join the newsletter as well because we're going to keep you up to date with everything going on, and subscribe because we're almost at 3,000 subscribers, and that's when Hallow likes to see. We're going to submit to Hallow. We're going to be a Hallow app podcast one day. So you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next week with one of the vices and virtues. I don't know which one, but one of them. So we'll see you guys next time.